don't want to get into that. Visits to planet Earth by alien spacecraft, successful cover-up of the best data, bodies, and wreckage for at least 57 years. Now, yesterday I looked at a lot of the bunk that's being spread, an enormous amount of it. So I'll give you the 4 rules for debunkers just to get them out of the way, and you should think of the rest of the lecture sort of in that context. The government's the worst debunker, but we'll get into that. First is, don't bother me with the facts, my mind's made up. Second, what the public doesn't know, I'm not going to tell them. Third, if you can't attack the data, attack the people. It's very much easier. Look at the current issue of Sky and Telescope if you want a silly article about cosmic nonsense. My next MUFON Journal column, I suggest you buy the MUFON Journal. I do a monthly column. It's worth the price of admission. I've never said that before, but it sounds good. I talk about the Sky and Telescope article. And the 4th rule, of course, is do your research by proclamation. Investigation's too much trouble. So in a movie out there, I tell people about my Miss Gutkin experience. In the 5th grade, I had a teacher named Rose Gutkin. And I was a good student, and yet one day she said in class that there was, talking about the solar system, the sun in the middle, it sits still, and all the planets move around the sun. Well, I just the day before, as it happened, read in our 29-cent a volume encyclopedia bought at the supermarket that the whole solar system was moving around the galaxy at 12 miles a second. Boy, that seemed awful fast to me. So I spoke up, and she jumped on me. No, that's not the way. I said the whole system is moving. No, 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 that's not the way it is. So I went home, and I wasn't used to being given a hard time by a teacher. I brought in the encyclopedia the next day. And she very reluctantly agreed that, well, maybe that's the way it was. I met her more than 60 years later, incidentally. She was still alive back in my hometown of Linden, New Jersey, and she hadn't had any science at that time, and she didn't remember me, but she remembered some of the family. Anyway, the lesson I learned was, if you're going to tilt with the big boys and girls, you better have your facts in hand first. I strongly recommend that philosophy. You can take on anybody. I just did an Air Force major, retired pilot. We did a full-fledged debate down in Tennessee, and he didn't have his facts in hand. The video is available. I think they're all sold out here. But, I mean, it's a good example of how not to debate and to use the rules that the 4 rules that I mentioned. Okay. Now, there are many different ways to approach the cosmic Watergate. Obviously, a good way to start the lecture would be to introduce you to an alien, but I couldn't bring him because I couldn't get a visa for him, no passport. You know, I live in Canada. Somebody took this picture. I couldn't resist using it. Now, can governments keep secrets? Of course they can keep secrets. That big thing you see there is a good example of a monstrous object that was kept secret. That's called Jumbo. And somebody had the bright idea when they were going to test the first nuclear weapon that in case it was a fizzle, we don't want to lose that very extremely costly plutonium, we should test it inside a huge cylinder, namely Jumbo. It weighs 200 tons, it's 20-some feet long and 12 feet in diameter. It's a monster. They had the good sense not to put the bomb inside, or it wouldn't have survived. They hung this thing up, and it did survive. But this was brought from Ohio to New Mexico in secret. It's pretty good size and pretty heavy. And when I can find my button, it's big. You get the idea. Secrets can be kept. Now, one of my favorite documents, which illustrates the government cover-up, is this one. This is a cover of a privately published version of Project Bluebook Special Report 14. And this thing did get built in Canada, but that's not the point. Largest study ever done for the Air Force. You won't see it discussed in the anti-UFO books. Well, let's tell you what the Secretary of the Air Force said This was released in 1955. It set the tone for almost 50 years of massive misrepresentation, cover-up, whatever you want to call it. Here are a bunch of stupid quotes, if you will, from experts, but it's the last one that I'm interested in. On the basis of this study, we believe that no objects such as those popularly described as flying saucers have overflown the United States. I feel certain that even the unknown 3% could have been explained as conventional phenomena or illusions if more complete observational data had been obtained. That was from Donald Quarles, as Secretary of the Air Force. You can't get a higher authority than that. Well, this appeared in newspapers all across the country. Nobody gave the title of the report because the press release which went out didn't include the title. If somebody had said Blue Book Special Report 14, somebody else would have said, hey, what happened to 1 through 13? They were all classified, and they didn't want to admit that. They didn't say who did the work, Battelle Memorial Institute in Columbus, Ohio, and nobody asked. The problem with the statement by the Secretary of the Air Force is it is a total lie. There seem to be two facts. The unknowns were 3%, and that was just because there wasn't enough data. Well, here's the data. You decide. Categorization, psychological aberrations, crackpot cases, 1.5%. And many psychiatrists have said, are you sure it was only 1.5%? Because 2% of the people are crazy anyway. Anyway, the last group are the ones I'm interested in. All sightings are either they can't be explained, they can be explained, or you don't have enough data. I mean, to keep it simple, but break it down more. The unknowns were 21.5%, not 3%. That's not a misprint, in other words. He didn't move the decimal point a little carelessly or round it off. It's a total lie. Even more important, there's a separate category here called insufficient information, completely separate from the unknowns. He said they would have been identified if more complete observational data had been available. That's a lie. They define these terms in the report. Similar statements have been made for almost 50 years. And they keep making them, even though it isn't true. Where did that ever get in the way of a skeptic, a debunker? Just for kicks, I'll show you the quality evaluation. Some of those quotes, if you read them on the previous page, you know, all the sightings are from poor observers, all the good, you know. Anyway, 35% of the best cases, excellent, good, doubtful, and poor, were unknown. Only 18% of the poor case. In other words, the better the quality, the more likely to be an unknown. And yet we have Carl Sagan saying there are interesting cases that aren't reliable. There are reliable sightings that aren't interesting, but there are no interesting and reliable sightings. It's a total lie. That doesn't keep it from being repeated over and over again, but it's a lie. It's part of a cover-up, if you will. Now, Roswell has been lied about a great deal. Al Franken, everybody's favorite brilliant genius. I did a horrible television program with him. And he said, well, it couldn't have happened, Roswell, because, after all, it was only in the Roswell newspaper. I had made a special effort to send them copies of a whole bunch of clippings from other newspapers, including this, the Chicago Daily News, including this, the Los Angeles Herald Express. The article goes all the way down. But he says that's good enough for everybody else, isn't it, that it was only in the Roswell papers. It's a lie. It is interesting. These were both on July the 8th, 1947. And the story went out from New Mexico after noon. By that evening, this paper, the cover story was already in place. General believes it is radar weather gadget. It's the only paper I found that's got both stories simultaneously. The next day, all of them said, General Ramey empties Roswell saucer. He was the head of the 8th Air Force. He said it was just a radar reflector weather balloon. Now, there they've admitted they lied. In 1994, they admitted that they had lied in 1947. It was really a super mogul balloon, super secret, except that was a lie, too. Lies build on lies, build on lies. Part of the cover-up. But Everything is based on this article on July 9th, harassed rancher who located the saucer story. They leave out, when he is quoted in 1994, they quote from this article, we know he was pre-programmed by the military. He was grabbed back at his ranch, brought back into town with a new story. The last thing he said was, I am sure that it was not a weather balloon. Well, they quote a colonel in charge of disinformation, literally, that was his job, quotes lots of things from the article, but leaves out that part. Oh, the Air Force wasn't satisfied then. They made an active effort, not just passive. They staged the launch of a radar reflector weather balloon combination. These three pictures all deal with that. Newsmen watch Army radar crew launch disc in quotes. It was a calculated, clear-cut, unambiguous attempt to lie about flying saucers and present a new explanation that they admitted was a lie in 1994. This is 1947. Now, another place where they've lied, this is General Roger Ramey, head of the 8th Air Force. The head of the base at Roswell, Colonel Blanchard, reported to General Ramey. This is his chief of staff, Thomas Jefferson Dubose, where they lied. A, this is phony wreckage. It has nothing to do with what was found out there. But notice the piece of paper in Ramey's hand. Now, the Air Force claimed that they submitted this picture to an agency of the government. They didn't say who, presumably the CIA, to analyze it, to see if they could learn anything from this. Nope, they couldn't find anything on that. I had a picture made from the original negative, and it's clear there are words there. I mean, I don't care what language you speak, there are words there. And it's Dr. David Rudiak. Some of the words have to do with victims of the wreck and things like that. But the Air Force stated that it couldn't find anything on that picture. That's a lie. It's a cover-up. Now, here's their big report, which has the wrong picture on the cover because the rancher never said he saw anything come down. This is the mogul balloon explanation. It has other lies in it, but mogul balloon doesn't fit. Either the timing, the kinds of materials, the amount of materials, but New York Times carried it front page, a 60-column-inch article, upper left-hand corner started, of the Sunday Times. There is no better position for an article in the country. They didn't talk to anybody connected with Roswell. They talked to mogul balloon people, of course. They mentioned several books about Roswell, didn't mention mine, the only one of the books by a scientist. But why let the facts get in the way of a good debunking? Now, the colonel who wrote the book, Weaver, he quoted from this FBI memo. I know you can't read it, but the point is that he said, the object found resembles a high-altitude weather balloon and radar reflector, and then he left out, but that telephonic conversation between their office and Wright Field had not borne out this belief. That part gets left out. So he lets it stand that the FBI said it was a radar reflector. They didn't say it was a radar reflector. They said it wasn't a radar reflector. That's cover-up. He's got a big, fat book, but he doesn't include this one page. So you don't know that he's lying to you. Standard practice, I guess. This is the report, part of the cover-up, Air Force Headquarters, United States Air Force. This is the one with the beautiful explanation of crash test dummies, which, of course, weren't dropped until 6 years after Roswell. So they invented time travel for crash test dummies, but not for the rest of us, I guess. I also talked to the man in charge of the crash test dummy program. When I talked to him, he was a little older than this. He pointed out that the crash test dummies, like Sierra Sam here, are 6 feet tall and 175 pounds. They have to be the same size and weight as pilots. No way in the world they could be confused with a little guy this big, small, et cetera, et cetera. But again, if lying gets you where you want to go, they're going to do it. And they wonder that our children lie. Here's the story of the Roswell incident, crash at Corona. Don Berliner is an aviation and science writer. We did put out a 50th anniversary edition. I have a few copies available. This I ran out of, so I'm showing you the picture here. You can order it by mail. This is about the MJ-12 documents. We'll be talking about them a bit, too. more lies from the Air Force. I mean, Colonel Weaver, the same guy, had the gall to write an Englishman, Nick Redfern, that everybody knows those documents are bogus. So I wrote a Freedom of Information Act request saying all memos, letters, documents, etc., leading to that conclusion expressed on official stationery to a foreigner. We have nothing in response to your request. I appealed. We still have nothing in response to your request. They don't need to account for their viewpoints. They call that research by proclamation. Here's one of the MJ-12 documents, and even somebody in the UFO community has attacked, lots of people in the UFO community have attacked these documents. I'm satisfied they're still genuine. I've written a new review, but I'm out of it out here. But it's interesting that one of the objections from a military man was that it says briefing officer Admiral Roscoe Hillencoder, MJ-1, but he was only a rear admiral, so the document must be fraudulent. He would never have called himself admiral. I just got a bunch of documents from when I was at the Eisenhower Library where the guy who wrote the memo was a brigadier general, but he described the people involved in a meeting, I got several memos like this, using generic ranks for all of them, including himself. Calls himself General Goodpaster, signs it Brigadier General Goodpaster. So here's a military man complaining on the basis of that's phony baloney, ignoring the fact that generic ranks were used all the way down here. That's a lie. It's a flat-out lie. Here's that statement, briefing officer Admiral Roscoe H. Hillencoder. There's nothing wrong with that, and I've talked to a general, colonel, Navy commander. They all agree that generic ranks were used quite often. I had to throw in something related to UFOs that nobody seems to want to talk about, the physical trace cases. Over and over again, I hear from the noisy negativists that there is no physical evidence. Ted Phillips in Missouri has 5,000 physical trace cases from 90 countries. This is Delphos, Kansas. I was at this location. The saucer was sitting here when it took off. The ring was dry here. Tests were run on the soil. The ring soil won't grow anything. Normal soil grows stuff fine. Ring soil won't accept moisture. Normal soil makes instant mud. You can see how different they are. I had good soil analysis, much higher level of soluble minerals. Please note the sophisticated soil retention device there. I actually had somebody tell me that he couldn't believe anything I said because I had a paper plate in the picture. Hey, at the University of Chicago, in a Nobel Prize-winning physics experiment, they had an empty coffee can holding up a vital piece of equipment. If they can use a coffee can, I can use a darn old paper plate. We do have physical trace cases. Dr. Hynek last night was inducted posthumously into the UFO Hall of Fame. I used to joke with him that he was the same age as my father, so I was inducted into the Hall of Fame last night too, not posthumously as far as I can tell. Thank you. I looked at the award this morning in my room, and Hall of Fame, when I was 10 years old, I wanted to be a baseball player, and see, I finally made it into the Hall of Fame. Here are the names of the members of MJ-12, and the one that disturbs the most people is Dr. Donald Menzel. So I did a lot of research at Harvard archives. These guys were all dead when we got this, and I was able to determine that Dr. Menzel led a double life. Some people find that incredible. How could he have known all about crash saucers, alien bodies, etc.? He was just a Harvard University professor of astronomy, a total debunker about flying saucers, 3 anti-books, and so forth. And I wish to point out to you 3 good examples of people who led a double life: Burgess, Philby, and McLean. These were Soviet spies working in the English intelligence agency, MI5. Now that takes really tiptoeing through the tulips. I mean, you got to be careful when you're working in one intelligence agency and you work for the other guys too. So I found that out about Menzel. I didn't like him when I started this effort. He had a longer continuous association with the National Security Agency, more than 30 years as of 1960. He wrote Jack Kennedy of anybody in the country. He did classified work for 30 different companies, had a top secret ultra clearance with the Central Intelligence Agency, was doing all kinds of classified stuff. None of this shows up in an 8-page appreciation of him that was in Sky and Telescope, incidentally. So you can cover things up, people up to. There's Dr. Menzel. I didn't like him when he was alive. I developed a healthy appreciation of him after he was long gone. Now, here's a memo, one of the MJ-12 documents. It's been claimed that that typewriter dates to the 1960s, so obviously it's a fraud. Dr. Bob Wood paid for a question documents examiner to look at it. It's a 1940 typewriter. It's legit. This is my favorite MJ-12 document, the Cutler Twining memo. It says National Security Council, NSC, MJ-12 Special Studies Project. It's the only document we have that's on original onion skin paper. There's a lot more to go into, but the point is that Philip Klass had comments to make about this. There's Phil when he was healthier. I think I have, yes. Here's his check to me for $1,000 for proving him wrong about the typeface on that document. I couldn't resist it. He sent me a lawyerly letter. I included this in a report, threatening to sue me because I couldn't use that. I said, Phil, you sent me the check. I Xeroxed it, I cashed it, it was good, I can do whatever I want with the Xerox, and then he shut up. But he sent everybody a copy of his challenge to me, but didn't tell anybody that he paid me. I mean, you know, and I mention this in this context because people keep asking me, do you think he worked for the government? Simple answer is yes. The CIA admitted way back when the Church hearings in the 70s that they had approached loads of journalists. He was an ideal candidate. Trained in electrical engineering, working in Washington, could attend all kinds of conferences, travel all over the place. He certainly would have been somebody they asked what somebody said at a certain conference and who was talking out of turn of our guys and so forth. So do I think, and he wasn't married. He got married when he was 60 years old to avoid a debate with me in New York, I think. It was at the very same time we were supposed to debate. Hey, people do anything to get out of debating me. I say that because of a debate in Tennessee in January. I think the videos are all gone, but you'll see what debunkers do in debates. Had a nice one in Oxford. We won that one. They took a vote. Didn't in January. But here's Colonel Weaver. This is that response. We have no records responsive to your request. And honestly, he's the guy who wrote the big fat Air Force report and said the documents are bogus. Honestly, I was told by somebody who had known him years before that his specialty was disinformation. Now, I'm always getting told by people, use the Freedom of Information Act. The Europeans think Americans can just ask for anything and you'll get it because you have a right to know. Every agency has a page-long list of things you don't have a right to know under Freedom of Information. This is one of, well, 80% of a national security agency document was blacked out. I have to tell you the story, but just to let you know that you don't always get what you ask for, or you get it, but it's not there. Back in the late 70s, a group of us went after the Central Intelligence Agency. We want all your UFO stuff. We don't have any UFO stuff. Go away. You do too. We do not. We go to court. You can bring an action under Freedom of Information. The judge says, search your files, gentlemen. But we don't have anything, Your Honor. Search your files, gentlemen. They come back to court. Did you find anything, gentlemen? Well, yeah, we found about 950 pages of UFO materials. From 0 to 950, that's pretty good math. Nothing was above secret. And, oh yeah, here's a list of 57 other documents that we found. We can't release those because they originated with other agencies. Well, okay, you go through those documents, you go through the list, and you find 18 of those documents that they can't release were from the National Security Agency, the NSA. So we file a Freedom of Information Act. We want these documents as listed by your buddies at the CIA. You can't have anything. National security, sources and methods, go away. We appeal. They deny. We go to court. The judge says, do a search. We only knew about 18 documents. No big deal, really. They come back to court. How many UFO documents did you find, NSA? Only 239, Your Honor. What? But 79 are from other agencies. We can't release those. 160 of our own. Fine, we'll take those. Well, they got rid of 4. Okay, we'll take 156. Sorry, sources and methods, we can't give you anything. Well, we tried a legal ploy. It's been done before. We asked that they submit the documents to the judge, Gerhard Giselle, Oliver North's judge later than this, so that he could review the documents to see if they were justified in saying national security. I mean, if it's just embarrassment, that's not a justification. They refused to show any of the documents to Judge Giselle. However, they provided him with a 21-page, legal size, affidavit justifying the withholding. Our lawyer didn't get to see that. He got to see it in chambers, in camera. He was so impressed by what he saw, not having seen any of the 156 UFO documents, that he agreed with the NSA they should not release those documents, saying the public interest in disclosure is far outweighed by the potential danger to the security of the United States should those documents be released. National security and flying saucers. We went to the Federal Court of Appeals. I was there for the oral hearings. They got to look at the same affidavit, which we hadn't seen, special clearance to see it, and they agreed with the lower court, and the Supreme Court wouldn't hear the case. Well, now what do? We file a Freedom of Information Act request for the affidavit. Hey, we got it. There's one of the pages. Here's two more of them. It was 80% blacked out. Now, the story doesn't end there. Naturally, I filed for the CIA UFO documents, which the NSA said they found. Out of those 79 documents, 23 were from the CIA, which had done a court-ordered search, mind you, but hadn't turned those up. So they're supposed to respond within 10 working days. It took them 2 years. Oh, they work an hour a day, you know, something like that. And they sent me 9 documents. They were press abstracts of Eastern European newspaper articles about flying saucers. It took them 2 years. The Russians had them the day they were published, of course. And I appealed. They didn't, all their documents were withheld. So I appealed. And they told me, if you have any questions, call this number and ask for Charles. No last name. And I did that. He said, you're not going to appeal, are you? And I said, of course I am. Well, you don't expect to get anything, do you? I said, yes. Proof that something is being withheld. Phil Klass would say I was too lazy if I didn't make the appeal. So I filed my appeal, and 3 years later, they sent me 4 of their documents. We'll see those in a little bit. I can't remember which order I put these in. So, meanwhile, things are happening. Clinton signed a new executive order making it tougher to keep old documents classified after 25 years. And so I called the NSA. I'd heard a rumor that they were putting out, reissuing that highly redacted to be fancy justification. And yes, they were. They had a whole package. They were releasing the 156 UFO documents too. Wow. And the girl was reading, she had an article from Phil Klass saying Stanton Friedman always shows these blacked out documents. He never says sources and methods. Very embarrassing for the agency. And so they sent me the package. 156 pages, which weren't blacked out. They were whited out. And they sent a much less redacted version of the affidavit. I mean, this is in the late 90s. This thing was written in 79, 80. So there's a whited out document. You can read 2 lines. You got 156 pages like this. The word UFO shows up. All the rest is sources and methods. Now, if you believe that, you can buy the Brooklyn Bridge from me. I took title last year, you see, when I was up in New York. I mean, it's nonsense. But it doesn't show up so well on television. No, heavily blacked out. There's another one just to show you, very informative. There's one of the CIA documents. Isn't that exciting? It's a CIA UFO document. Important words like doc reference, title, info date. There's some numbers up here, stuff like that. A very informative knot, I guess you could say. I think there's another one here. Yeah. And they have a sense of humor. Well, sort of. They sent me 1 page of these documents that said deny in toto. that was printed on it in parentheses. They couldn't find 8 lousy words to declassify on the page. Now, isn't that absurd? They're not covering up anything, but there ain't nothing here. And this is a UFO document as they stated and as the NSA stated. Now, I went back to the well after I got this new, improved NSA document, and they didn't free one more word on those documents. So, is there a cosmic Watergate? Of course there is. Now, I've left out a few steps along the way. For example, the CIA, just at the transition time between Truman and Eisenhower, called together the Robertson panel, named after a scientist. They had a bunch of scientists, very sharp people, almost all of whom knew nothing at all about UFOs, of course. That's the standard practice. Bring in a committee. Very bright people. The fact that they don't know anything about the subject at hand, well, that doesn't matter. They're unbiased. I always thought ignorance was the worst bias in any evaluation of anything. I mean, the same thing happened, incidentally, with the Condon report, the University of Colorado study. It was given to a committee of the National Academy of Sciences, of which Condon was a member, of course. And that's a self-electing body. They can blackball people, in other words. You think they're ever going to say anything bad about one of their own? And so this committee spent a little time, didn't check any of the investigations, and put their stamp of approval on it. Fine job, gentlemen. Interesting. 965 pages, a whole long chapter on government involvement in UFO investigations, not one mention of Project Bluebook, Special Report 14. Condon's people covered 117 cases. 30% couldn't be identified. That wasn't in the press release, and it isn't anywhere explicitly mentioned in the report. Bluebook had 3,201 sightings. It's not even mentioned. And did they know about it? Yeah, I wrote Condon about it and have a letter back acknowledging receipt of my letter. So the government paid for that study. Who was Condon working for? I don't know. Incredibly arrogant guy. He has stated publicly, before he died, of course, that the files weren't preserved. He lied. They're at the American Philosophical Society Library in Philadelphia, where Donald Menzel's UFO papers are. But the goodies I found out about him were up at the Harvard archives. It took permission from 3 different people for me to see. He was also a National Academy of Sciences member, incidentally, and he had taken a public stand, so for sure they weren't going to say anything bad about it. But the Robertson panel concluded that, well, Bruce Maccabee showed you earlier today the film taken out in the desert by an official Navy photographer, and the NPIC, National Photographic Interpretation Center, spent loads of man-hours looking over that film. It was not birds. It was not a whole long list of other things. But the Robertson panel overruled them. Took them just a few minutes to decide it must be birds, so let's go on. But they concluded that they should debunk the subject, using the services of astronomers and television and so forth. As an official, it took many years before that document was released. The Robertson panel data wasn't available until well after the 60s. The group met in 1953, early 53. We have many other instances of governments covering things up. Just a quickie on my own self. I had a security clearance for 14 years. Q clearance required FBI investigation. Friends told me they'd been talked to by the FBI and so forth. Okay, at one point a number of years ago, I filed a Freedom of Information Act privacy, the two together, request for all my files of the FBI and the CIA, separately. The FBI responded quite promptly. I gave them everything about my past history, when I had the clearances, and, you know, how many Stanton Friedmans are there? There shouldn't be much confusion about that. I get back a response saying, we have no files on you. Sorry. Then I hear from the CIA. All we have on you is a negative name check request from the FBI, and here's a copy of the file. It's a little squib of paper, and it gives a file number. Aha! I go back to the FBI. Could you check your files again? Here's what I got from the CIA. They said you made a check, and here's the file number. And I get back a fairly prompt response. It turns out we do indeed have files on you, but they're classified. I write another letter saying, could you tell me the level of classification? And could you tell me how big the file is? They had told Bill Moore that he had, I don't know, 52 pages and it was secret. And I felt cheated that they weren't going to tell me. Well, they send me back a letter saying, that information is classified too. Larry Bryant, who was here someplace at the conference, was successful in getting the release of a small part of my files. They had my passport record. They had wrong information about me. I think at one point they called me my own brother. Stanton is Terry's brother or something like that. But when they want to keep things covered up, they will. They do. And in case you're wondering, well, wait a minute now, and people have asked me this here, isn't there a rule that they have to declassify after X number of years where X is 10 or 20 or 30 or something? No, there is no such rule. As a matter of fact, at the Eisenhower Library, and I asked this in November, fairly recently, just a few months ago, how many pages would you estimate of your files are still classified? About 300,000. He went out of office in 1961. So everybody who says, oh, there isn't anything more classified, anything more covered up, anything more anything. And also, if you're going to go there, Abilene, Kansas, motels are cheap, nice place to visit. Don't go to the door and say, I'd like you to put this topic, Majestic 12, let's say, into your computers, because their files are not computerized. Well, what do I have to do? Well, you can decide which finding aids you want to look at, and then you tell us which boxes you want us to bring you, and then you look through those, and if there's a withdrawal sheet, you can request mandatory classification review, and they've been running on an average about 2 years to respond to those. So it isn't easy getting at this stuff. The Kennedy Library, incidentally, has 10 pages, 10 drawers full of special compartmented information. The MJ-12 documents are top secret, magic, can be ultra, umbra, whatever. And they can't even look at that stuff to see whether they find anything that says magic, because that would violate security. And not all the archivists can look at that stuff, only the guys who have special security clearances. So let me read a comment that you'd think would get any newspaper man or any media person worth his salt excited. I mean, I think those documents are very exciting. People say, aren't you frustrated getting that kind of stuff? I said, well, it proves they're covering up. That's a step forward. This is a memo from General Carol Bolender, dated 20 October 1969. It was a result of this memo that Blue Book was canceled. He had been not connected with it at all, was working for the Air Force on the lunar excursion module. We landed in July of '69. And one of his first assignments, what the heck should we do about Blue Book? Because the Condon report had said, cancel it. He agreed with that. But he said, quote, moreover, reports of unidentified flying objects which could affect national security are made in accordance with JNAP, that's Joint Army Navy Air Force publication, 146, or Air Force Manual 55-11, and are not part of the Blue Book system. Now, 2 paragraphs later, he's saying if Blue Book is closed, the public won't have a place to report sighting. Quote, however, as already stated, reports of UFOs which could affect national security would continue to be handled through the standard Air Force procedures designed for this purpose. When you get those items, you find Blue Book wasn't even on the distribution lists. I did find Bolender. I did speak with him. He was very sharp. He immediately agreed. You got 2 different systems. When a saucer goes down the runway at a SAC base where there are nuclear weapons stored, that's of national security interest. When Joe Blow sees something flying across the back 40, they don't care. They got enough to worry about The other kind of thing, for example, and I've heard this same kind of story at least 6 times. What if you send 2 airplanes up to chase a flying saucer and only one comes back? I'd say that was a national security problem. We just lost a pilot in a plane. I mean, they may be in a Zeta Reticulan zoo, but that's a separate consideration. I've heard a story like that 6 different times. That may be one reason for not wanting to release. Now, I always get asked, why would the government cover this up? So I'll throw my suggestions at you. I don't speak for the government. You may have noticed that. I hope. Let me give you 5 quick reasons. I just gave you reason number 6. They don't want to admit that we've lost aircraft to them, because maybe guys wouldn't want to fly after that. First reason is you want to figure out how the darn things work. They make wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems. They can literally fly circles around anything we have flying. The first country to duplicate the behavior rules the planet. Wonderful weapons delivery and defense systems. You got wreckage. You set up your secret project. Rule number 1 for security. You cannot tell your friends without telling your enemies. Because your friends listen to the radio, watch television, so do your enemies, and read the newspapers, etc. Second problem, what if the other guy, every country has another guy, you know, we and the Russians, India and Pakistan, etc., etc. What if the other guy figures out how they work before you do? You don't want them to know, you know, they know, because how do you defend against them? Third problem, what would happen if there were an announcement made tomorrow by 2 highly trusted individuals around the world? Now, I take nominations for that list. It's hard to find. I'd say the Queen and the Pope. An odd couple, but what the heck. What if they said, yes, indeed, flying saucers, some of them are alien spacecraft, and they're here? What would happen? Well, I expect mental hospital admissions would go up, stock market would go down, church attendance would go up. But I think the biggest thing that would happen, based on my 600 college lectures, is that the younger generation, which unlike me was never alive when there wasn't a space program, would immediately push for a new view of ourselves instead of as Americans, Canadians, Greeks, Peruvians, Chileans, Israelis, Earthling. And the younger generation would probably say, that'd be great. And then you have to sit back and say, well, wait a minute now. There's no government on this planet of which I'm aware that wants its citizens to owe their primary allegiance to the planet. Nationalism is the only game in town. Now, there's a fourth problem. The religious right-wing fundamentalists, Jerry Falwell, Pat Robertson, have loudly proclaimed, we are the only intelligent life in the universe. What an insult to God that is, if this is the best he can do. Sorry. If this is the best she can do, okay. But they'd be up the creek. Pat Robertson actually said, if you believe that there's other intelligent life besides here, he said, this is all the work of the devil, you understand. If you believe there's other intelligent life besides here, you should be publicly stoned to death, according to the Bible. I don't wear a stone-proof vest. I'm not afraid of Pat, you know. There's a fifth reason. And you might say, well, who cares what those guys think? But remember the Republicans, the people who elected Reagan and Bush 1 and Bush 2 the first time, were very close to the right wing of the party. They don't want these guys to be up the creek without a religious paddle. The fifth reason is very different. Suppose an announcement were to be made, I can't say quietly, that would be absurd, but carefully, not War of the Worlds style. Hey, I was in New Jersey in 1938 when that program was on. I didn't hear it. I was 4 years old. But if you believed it, they were destroying New Jersey. That's reason enough for panic. I mean, it may have deserved it, you know, but that's another story. But if you say they're neutral, a lot of people would say, well, look, they're coming here. We're not going there. They must be more advanced technologically than we are. That means that soon there'll be new methods of energy production. There goes the oil industry, car industry, transport, ground transport, air transport, cars, planes, communications, computers, economic chaos. We don't know how to handle that very well, we Earthlings. You may remember late 80s. If only the Russians would take down that Berlin Wall And if they would have freedom and democracy and elections and capitalism, everything would be great. And all those things have happened and everything's terrible. They're certainly no better off now. I mean, they don't need to worry about being shipped off to Siberia, but things are not good. We're not very good at large-scale economic transitions. And then finally, that sixth reason that I mentioned, we'd have to admit, A, that we were lying. For government people would have to admit they'd been lying for 56 years. Well, you'd always say it was them, 57 years. It was them, not us. It's not our fault. We inherited this situation. But they'd also have to admit that we had lost aircraft. And who knows how many. If I've heard of 6 cases, there's got to be a lot more than that. So I can understand that. On the other hand, we're going into space this century a lot. Isn't it time we learn that we're not the big shots in the neighborhood? I think we need to know that. Now, let me throw in some parallel. People have been asking, why would they come here? I heard a reporter ask Dr. Maccabee that. And I have one paper which I'm out of, which gave 26 reasons, but let me just throw a few at you to get your thinking powers going. They're being punished. Spend 2 weeks on Earth. That's punishment to last a lifetime. They're media people with a weekly show, Idiocy in the Boondocks. They're mining engineers. The Earth is the densest planet in the solar system. That means more heavy metals, weird things like iridium and osmium and rhenium and tungsten and gold and uranium. They're all very, very dense materials. With the densest planet, I don't mean the people now. That's a different kind of judgment. But cubic foot of Earth on the average weighs more than cubic foot of any other planet. This could be the hunting and fishing capital of this corner of the galaxy. No license required, you know. Honeymoon capital. Again, no license required. I got a whole bunch of reasons. You know, why do people fly into Washington, D.C.? Well, there are a lot of reasons. But let me summarize one that gets us back to the whole business about the government. I make one assumption about every advanced civilization, namely it's concerned about its survival and security. That seems to be the common factor. That being the case, you have to keep tabs on the primitives in the neighborhood, but only close tabs on those primitives who show signs of being able to bother you. At the end of World War II, there were 3 signs to any visiting alien who had any smarts that soon these idiot Earthlings would be moving out. Soon meaning 100 years, which on a cosmic time scale ain't nothing, baby. The 3 signs were nuclear weapons, radioactive material in the atmosphere that could only come from a nuclear weapon, V-2 rockets, not lifting mail from Germany to England, but bombing people, and powerful radar, which indicates electronics, the signals leave the planet and so forth. Put them all together, within 100 years, these guys, if they don't kill each other off, are going to go out. Now, isn't it amazing that the only place in the entire world in July 1947 where you could study all 3 of these technologies was southeastern New Mexico? That's where that jumbo picture was taken. That's where the first nuclear weapon was tested at Trinity Site, Alamogordo, near Alamogordo, at the White Sands Missile Range. That's also where we were firing to capture German V-2 rockets. And it's where we had our best radar to track the rockets, which often didn't go where they were supposed to go. Some were sent north and went south to Mexico. A little incident over that. We don't talk about that very loudly. Now, I went through this litany on an English television program, and some British astronomer who was there very haughtily said, well, they could have gone to the Soviet Union. I said, sorry, they didn't test their first A-bomb until 1949. Don't bother me with the facts. My mind's made up, you know. So what I'm trying to say is it makes sense to me that they would come here with 1 major and 27 minor reasons for checking on us, collecting genetic material, doing all kinds of hybridization. Heck, I cut up a frog along with millions of other students when I was a kid in school. And if people saw that they don't like frogs, what are they doing that for? It was part of an educational procedure. Maybe that's why they're here. But I think the biggest reason they're here is to make sure that we don't go out there, to quarantine us. I don't think we have yet earned the opportunity to be part of the space community. I think it's important that we learn how to treat ourselves, how to decide such questions as who speaks for planet Earth. Oh, we'll hold an election. That's the American way. Oh, wait a minute. Chinese have 4 times as many people as we have. No, we're not going to hold an election. Well, we'll do it by area. Hey, wait a minute. Canada's larger than the United States. Oh, well, what are we going to do here, folks? This is not an easy problem. Who speaks for planet Earth? Why don't they land on the White House lawn? Does anybody honestly believe the President of the United States speaks for 6 billion Earthlings? He has trouble speaking for 300 million Americans. You may have noticed that. Okay, enough politics. I want to make sure that I don't know if there's anybody in here coming up, but yeah, I've already, I think there's another, yeah. This has got a copy of Phil Klass's check in it. You can enjoy that at home. Don't hide it under the blanket or anything. But. Oh, there's Marjorie Fish's models. People have lied about those too. This is from the Betty Hill case, and I just want to end with, this matches what Betty drew, but ad astra, to the stars. The base stars, Zeta 1 and Zeta 2 reticuli. And I just want to give you a different vision of things. The new data says they're 39 light years from here. They're only 1/8 of a light year apart, which means they're 30 times closer to each other, those two stars, than the sun is to the next star over. From a planet around one looking at the other, you can directly observe planets. You can see the other star all day long. And they're 1 billion years older than we are. The star is at least 1 billion years older than the sun. Does that change your perspective that maybe they would be opting for interstellar travel a little sooner than we would when they got neighbors down the street? So we need to change our perspective too. I think that's the last slide. Yeah. So I want to thank you very much for listening. I'll be around at my table. Thank you.